It started with a tomato, but now it's turning into a full-blown trade war. President Trump has just slapped new tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and Brazil, not over trade deficits, but over everything from fentanyl to free speech. One country is losing billions over fruit and vegetables. Another is being punished for taxing tech companies. And one, it's being hit with a massive 50% tariff over what Trump calls a witch hunt against a former president. So what's really going on here? Is this about protecting American workers, or is something much bigger playing out behind the scenes? Let's break it down, because what's happening right now could reshape the future of trade across the entire Western Hemisphere. When Trump returned to office, he didn't just revive his old trade policies, he supercharged them. This time, America First isn't just about tariffs on goods. It's a full-spectrum pressure campaign that targets countries for everything from digital taxes to political prosecutions. Trump's trade team, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has made it clear Latin America is now the front line in the global economic showdown between the U.S. and China. And if countries don't fall in line, they pay. Trump's justification? Reciprocity. He says if other countries charge American goods 20 or 30%, the U.S. should hit back just as hard, or harder. Fair trade in Trump's world means you hit us, we hit you worse. But critics say this isn't about fairness at all. It's about power, and using tariffs as a weapon to force political change abroad. And nowhere is that more obvious than in what happened next. Because the first big blow, it landed right on Mexico's agriculture industry. Let's get into it. Mexico isn't just America's neighbor. It's the U.S.'s biggest trade partner. Over $800 billion in goods moved between the two countries last year alone. But that didn't stop Trump from dropping the hammer. On July 14th, his administration hit Mexican tomatoes with a 17% tariff, abruptly ending a long-standing agreement that had kept prices stable for years. That deal? It had been renewed 5 times since 1996, and it helped prevent a full-blown trade dispute. Now, it's gone, and Trump's message was clear. Mexico is on notice. The reason? U.S. officials claim Mexican farmers were flooding the market with tomatoes at artificially low prices, what trade experts call dumping. But behind that explanation, something deeper was brewing. Trump had already warned Mexico about fentanyl trafficking, border crime, and cartel activity. Now he was tying those security issues directly to trade penalties. A 17% tomato tax might seem small, but it signaled a huge shift. Trump is using the economy to punish countries he says aren't doing enough to fix America's problems. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum tried to de-escalate, sending negotiators to Washington. But Trump didn't budge. In fact, he upped the pressure even more just days later. And this time, it wasn't just tomatoes. It was the whole country. Let's talk about the 30% tariff that shocked Mexico's leadership. Just 2 days before Mexico got hit, Trump turned north, and Canada felt the squeeze. On July 12th, the Trump administration announced a new 35% tariff on Canadian imports. That's a sharp jump from the previous 25%. And while USMCA-compliant goods were still technically protected, the message was unmistakable. Even allies aren't safe. Trump blamed Canada for 2 things. First, their so-called barriers to U.S. trade, and second, and more controversially, their alleged role in the fentanyl crisis. But here's the twist. Actual fentanyl seizures at the U.S.-Canada border account for less than 1% of the total. So why the sudden escalation? Some say it had nothing to do with drugs, and everything to do with tech money. Just days earlier, Ottawa had moved forward with a digital services tax targeting big tech firms that rake in millions from Canadian users. The tax would have hit U.S. giants like Google, Meta, and Amazon hard, and Trump wasn't having it. Within days, Canada backed off. On June 30th, they quietly rescinded the tax, clearly under pressure from Washington. But it wasn't enough to stop the tariff bomb from dropping 2 weeks later. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he was still hopeful a deal could be reached before the tariffs go into full effect on August 1st. But with tensions rising and Trump turning up the heat, that optimism might be short-lived. And just when it seemed like the dust was settling, Trump fired off a shot that stunned Brazil and shook the entire BRICS bloc. Let's get into it. On July 9th, Trump took aim at a country that wasn't even in a trade dispute with the U.S., Brazil. In a fiery post on Truth Social, Trump announced a massive 50% tariff on Brazilian imports starting August 1st, more than double the previous rate. But the reason had nothing to do with trade imbalances or steel dumping. Trump said it was retaliation for what he called a witch hunt, the ongoing prosecution of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, a Trump ally, is facing criminal charges over an alleged plot to overturn Brazil's 2022 election. Trump called it a political vendetta and decided Brazil needed to feel the pain. But that wasn't all. Trump also blasted Brazil's Supreme Court for allegedly censoring U.S. social media platforms, including content posted by conservative voices. The message was clear: mess with Trump's allies or speech online, and you'll pay. Brazil's Vice President Geraldo Alckmin tried to play it down, saying, "Brazil is not a problem for the United States." But with a 50% tariff looming, his calm tone couldn't hide the panic spreading through Brazil's export sectors. And just days earlier, at the BRICS summit, Trump had warned that all BRICS countries, including Brazil, could face additional tariffs. The group, which includes China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa, had drawn Trump's ire for moving closer together economically. This wasn't just about trade. It was geopolitical, a direct challenge to any nation seen drifting away from Washington. And for Brazil, the cost could be enormous. But while Brazil was reeling, Trump's trade war was already hitting closer to home and driving straight into America's biggest manufacturing engine, the auto industry. Let's break that down. If you thought this trade war was just about foreign policy, think again. Trump is hitting industries right at the heart of the U.S. economy. On June 4th, the Trump administration officially doubled tariffs on steel and aluminum, jacking them up to a punishing 50%. That's not just a bump, it's a shockwave. Countries like Mexico, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina, all key suppliers, were instantly in the crosshairs. The only country spared? The United Kingdom, which got a quiet exemption. No explanation, no apology, just spared. But the real chaos was under the hood. Literally, because just weeks earlier, Trump had reignited his long-running battle with the auto industry. Back in March, he rolled out a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and parts. That meant higher prices not just for foreign cars, but for American-made ones too, because of how deeply connected the supply chains are across North America. A single car might cross the U.S.-Mexico border 8 times before it's done. Industry leaders warned it could raise production costs by $4,000 to $10,000 per vehicle. That's not a tweak, that's an economic earthquake. So in April, Trump made a tactical shift. He offered a kind of lifeline. Cars built with at least 85% USMCA-compliant parts would be exempt. He even promised reimbursements for manufacturers who assemble cars in the U.S. using foreign parts. But here's the catch. These were temporary moves. Trump made it clear. If things don't change fast, those tariffs could stack again. This wasn't just pressure. It was a warning shot to the auto giants. Build in America or bleed cash. And while Detroit scrambled to adapt, another front in the war opened up, one tied to oil, sanctions, and a country already drowning in crisis. Let's talk about Venezuela. Trump wasn't just targeting America's closest allies, he was also going after countries doing business with its enemies. On March 24th, he signed a sweeping executive order slapping 25% tariffs on any country that imports oil from Venezuela, whether directly or through a third party. It was one of the most aggressive moves yet, not just against the Maduro regime, but against anyone still doing business with it. Why does that matter? Because several Latin American nations, including Nicaragua, Argentina, and even some private firms in Brazil, have continued importing Venezuelan oil despite U.S. sanctions. And now, under this new order, those countries face stiff penalties on everything they try to export to the U.S. The message was loud and clear. If you fund Maduro, you lose access to American markets. But it wasn't just about oil. Trump's order also empowered Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a longtime hardliner on Venezuela, to enforce these tariffs at his discretion. That meant this wasn't just policy. It was personal. The fallout was immediate. Leaders across the region accused Trump of overreach, saying he was using trade to force political outcomes, not protect U.S. workers. And as smaller economies braced for impact, others worried it was only a matter of time before they were next. Because by this point, it wasn't just about steel, cars, or oil. It was about who Trump saw as a friend and who he was ready to punish. And just as countries started to push back, the courts stepped in, throwing the entire tariff strategy into legal limbo. Let's get into the legal chaos that followed. By late May, Trump's tariff blitz had triggered a different kind of resistance, not from foreign governments, but from inside the U.S. legal system. On May 28th, the U.S. Court of International Trade delivered a stunning blow, ruling that many of Trump's tariffs exceeded presidential authority. The court took particular issue with Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a law meant for national emergencies, not blanket trade warfare. According to the ruling, Trump had stretched the definition of emergency beyond recognition, using it to justify sweeping economic penalties against allies and rivals alike. The court warned, this wasn't trade policy, it was unchecked power. But the victory for Trump's critics didn't last long. Just one day later, a federal appeals court hit pause on the ruling, temporarily reinstating the tariffs, while judges reviewed the administration's appeal. For now, the tariffs stayed in place, but the legal future of Trump's strategy was suddenly uncertain. This legal whiplash exposed the deeper gamble behind Trump's second-term trade doctrine. He wasn't just rewriting trade rules, he was daring the courts to stop him. And so far, they hadn't. But as the court battles simmered, Trump's trade team pushed forward with even more aggressive tweaks, this time zeroing in on digital taxes, retaliatory threats, and what they call non-reciprocal trade. The next flashpoint? A quiet move in Ottawa, and a quick reversal that showed just how powerful Trump's threats had become. Let's talk about Canada's digital tax surrender, and why Silicon Valley was celebrating. By late June, the Trump administration had already rattled Canada enough to force a major policy U-turn. Ottawa's much-discussed digital services tax, designed to squeeze big tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Meta, was suddenly scrapped. The tax had been set to hit companies earning over $15 million from Canadian users, with payments retroactive back to 2022. But just weeks after its approval, Canada folded under pressure, canceling the tax to avoid further U.S. retaliation. This wasn't just a win for Silicon Valley. It was a clear signal that Trump's tariffs weren't just economic tools. They were political weapons, and with the clock ticking on looming higher tariffs for Canada and Mexico, set to take effect August 1st, the stakes couldn't be higher. Trade talks remain tense, deadlines approach, and the ripple effects are spreading across industries and borders alike. What's clear is this: Trump's America First trade policies have ushered in a new era of uncertainty in the Western Hemisphere. Allies and rivals alike are scrambling to adjust. Will this strategy ultimately protect American workers? Or will it push key partners away, weakening the very alliances the U.S. depends on? One thing's for sure: the trade landscape in Latin America and beyond will never look the same. Trump's aggressive tariffs and tough rhetoric have shaken up decades of trade partnerships across Latin America and beyond. From tomatoes to steel, from Canada to Brazil, no one has been immune. His America First approach isn't just about economics. It's about using trade as a tool for political influence, security concerns, and even ideological battles. But the question remains: is this strategy sustainable? Will punishing key allies and partners bring the results Trump promises, or will it drive important trade relationships and trust into deeper crisis? As tariffs rise and negotiations stretch on, the stakes couldn't be higher for the future of trade in the Western Hemisphere. One thing is certain: the ripples of these decisions will be felt for years to come. So, what do you think? Is this tough stance the right move for America? Or is it risking too much for uncertain gain? Let me know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Now Famous Feed. See you all in the next one. Thank you.